Well, it is a joy to be here this morning. Yes, I'm still here. Yes, now I'm on this side of the stage. It is good to be with you. First thing I want to let you know is that Gateway has a good reputation. So I pastor kind of down the street in Burlington, but I know a little bit about this church. Not a lot. I know enough to know that you are loved in your community, that you do good work, that you are generous, and that you are embodying Jesus well. So thank you. I think that's a really big deal. I think it's really important. I think that's why we exist as the church. So keep going in that. As it was said, my name is Dave. I'm a guy who does stuff like this from time to time with compassion. I'm a singer and a songwriter and a worship leader and a pastor and a father. And I want to tell you a little bit about my first Christmas as a worship pastor. My wife and I had just been married, and we moved from here. Family is in Hamilton, Ontario, and we moved to the booming metropolis of Lethbridge, Alberta, which is south of Calgary a little bit. First year as a pastor, and anyone who's worked at a church or been heavily involved as a volunteer knows that Christmas is busy, right? And we're away from family, and it's a big church, so we're running multiple services. So we're not going home for Christmas this year, which is kind of exciting and kind of terrifying. I got to do all kinds of things that year. I got to, sing songs and coordinate things. I think I got to be a llama handler at one point because other duties is assigned in the job description, I guess. I don't know. But the thing that stuck with me most about that first Christmas was an invitation from a couple. Pam and Owen were about 10 years older than us. They had 3 young kids at home. And they said, hey guys, we know you're here. We know you're not going home for Christmas. We would love to have you join us for Christmas. And at first we thought, oh, that's really nice. It means we'll come over for a meal. And then they're like, no, actually what we want you to do is when you're done the service, Christmas Eve, come to our house, be part of our family, join us for the big meal, and then sleep over. And then do Christmas morning with us, as part of our family. And let me tell you, doing Christmas like that with another family is like all of the good of Christmas with your family, but with none of the drama. It's wonderful. It was this amazing opportunity. And actually we did it multiple years, and the joke became that there were other family members who called us the replacements, because we would be there and these other family members wouldn't be, until this family started calling those family members the replacements. We were actually adopted as family. It was wonderful. I think, as I think back on that wonderful, hospitable invitation, it struck me that was a sacrifice for them, that it cost them something. And I want to talk this morning about sacrifice, which is not Thanksgiving, but I think sacrifice is the right response to a thankful heart. I think this is where Thanksgiving moves us. I'm going to be reading this morning from Romans 12. The ushers have Bibles. If you need a Bible, just put your hand up. They would love to get you one. Romans 12, 1 and 2. And this is one of Paul's letters. It is beautiful. It is full of rich theology and rich call to live in the way of Jesus. So I'm going to read this for you. We're going to come back to it a couple times. Romans 12, 1 and 2. Therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. Do not conform to the patterns of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. When I say the word sacrifice, when I first said it, what is it you think of? Maybe it's a story of generosity like that, but honestly, when I first came to it, what I thought of was like the scene in Return of the Jedi where they've got like Luke Skywalker and Han Solo tied up over spits, like they're going to sacrifice them, right? Or there's the scene in Indiana Jones too, like there's this like human sacrifice thing, which is a little scary. And sacrifice isn't a word we use a whole lot, right? It's kind of this weird thing. I also think of a friend of mine who had a medical condition where he needed a kidney. And someone, a stranger, was a match. And a stranger gave him his kidney. Now that's sacrifice. Both of their lives were forever changed because of it. I think as I look at my own life, I think I'm a good, polite Canadian. I like to practice kindness even, maybe generosity. But the idea of sacrifice scares me a little bit. It's kind of more skin in the game. It's a call to something more. And I want to look at this passage and unpack this with you. The first word, before we even get to sacrifice, is the word therefore. And when we turn to the Bible and the word therefore is there, we ask, what is it? Therefore. Right? It's a little, you get it? Okay. And what this does is it reminds us to look back. And I'm not going to read the first 11 chapters of Romans right now. You should. If you get a chance this week, open up the book, crack it open, and really enjoy that. Paul lays out the whole story of salvation, the whole story of who God is and what he is doing in the world. And it's this amazing summary of the story of God in 11 chapters. And I'm going to do my best to summarize it in some of my own words, but that take from this. I think he starts by reminding us that God has gifted us everything in creation. God made the world and it was good, and he gifted it to us. And we as people immediately took that gift and thought to ourselves, oh no, what if it gets away? I need to grab as much as I can and pull it to myself. I need to hold it tight to the point where we disobeyed. We fell into idolatry. We turned from God. We got tangled up looking inward instead of looking to God. And we got tangled up trying to control things. And I think control is actually at the heart of all idolatry. It's this desire for us to be in charge and to be able to predict things and to know what's coming next. But the story doesn't stop there, of course. God steps in, and he does it with his people Israel, time and time again, making faithful covenants that when they are unfaithful, God is faithful. He makes a way, the sacrificial system, for them to come near to him, to be in relationship with him. But they fail, and they fail, and they fail, and they fail. And then we get to Jesus, God's main act. This amazing gift given to us so that we can be in right relationship with God. Lived a perfect life, died a death he did not deserve, took the punishment that was laid on us for our sin, and created a way for us to be in right relationship with God, with each other, with all of creation. This is the story so far. This is the gospel. This is the good news. This is what brings us all here, right? What do we have in common as a church? The fact that we need Jesus. Not a whole lot more. And that's a beautiful thing. So what does Paul say? Therefore, in light of all of this, I urge you, brothers and sisters, everyone, not just the pastors, not the church leaders, everyone, every age, all of our kids, all of our seniors, everything. In view of God's mercy, in view of this great gift, offer your bodies as a living sacrifice. Wait now? That's a lot, right? That's much harder than like show up once a week and sing some songs, which is often what we think of when we think of worship. And he's saying, no, this is true worship. This is what it is to live back to God, to follow Jesus. Sacrifice involves death. And some of you, maybe when I said sacrifice, thought Leviticus, right? Maybe not. That's okay. The book of Leviticus lays out the sacrificial system for the people of God. And there are 5 kinds of sacrifice in there. And typically when we think about that kind of sacrifice, we think of atonement, right? The blood needed to make things right. And that's in there. That's 2 of the sacrificial systems have that. But 3 others aren't about atonement. They're about communion with God. They're about being in relationship. It's an invitation to come near. And so we see this here. Death often allows us to come near, to step into something new, to understand things in fresh ways. I think we're all afraid to die and to lose things. And I think we're kind of given a choice. There's 2 ways we can go out in the world. One is to try to do everything we can to collect and control and to hold it as tightly as we can. And we can watch it slowly slip from our fingers. I don't know anyone. I go to a lot of funerals. I work in a church. Probably go to almost 20 a year, and I have for the last 15 years. It's a lot of funerals. I don't know anyone who's managed to take their control and their stuff with them. The other option for how to live is with open hands, as a living sacrifice, living back to God. But we're called here not just to get there at the end, but to be living sacrifices, to live and embrace death at the same time, to bring them together. I love the way Eugene Peterson in The Message paraphrases this passage. Take your everyday, ordinary life. You're sleeping, eating, going to work, walking around life, and place it before God as an offering. Embracing what God does for you is the best thing you can do for him. I love that. Take your everyday, ordinary life. This isn't necessarily about these giant steps. We hear these stories of people doing these incredible things for God, and we think, oh no, that can't be me. And maybe it's not. What you're called to, what I'm called to, is to take my everyday, ordinary life and to offer it back as a living sacrifice. I think often in the church, this gets a little tricky because we end up saying everything physical is bad. Everything we own is bad. We should sell everything and give it to the poor, right? Which Jesus does say, and that's what they do in Acts, but none of us can really imagine that. And I'm not sure that call always hits us the right way. I think it's good to remind ourselves that the physical things of the world are good. They're good gifts. I think it's good that we live in houses and have clothes and have cars and, these can experience the beauty of creation and do these things and find rest and joy and hobbies. I think the problem comes when these things take the place of God. I think living our lives as living sacrifices requires us to reorder our worlds under the lordship of Jesus. Yes, have your hobbies. Yes, do the things you love. Yes, engage in these things. But Jesus is Lord above all of them. And we get ourselves into trouble when we forget that. And we take Jesus in this part of our lives, but not these parts of our lives. We are called to live in a reordered world. So how do we do this practically? What does sacrifice look like? Well, I think sacrifice first, many of us understand this in small ways because we come from families or we are in families. And even if your family of origin isn't perfect, and none of ours are, I think we understand that being in relationship with each other in a family requires sacrifice. Any young parents here who were up at 2 a.m. last night changing diapers? Right? No one in their right mind would be I want to do that. That's great. But we do it because it's good. And we learn the good in that. And we learn the good in being in relationship with each other. Again, I love that there are kids here this morning. And kids, I hope you feel like you are a part of this church. I hope you can go and find someone with gray hair and ask them questions. That's awesome. That's part of being in the church. We understand sacrifice and what that takes in a family. I think sacrifice is incredibly important in our mission, in living this great commission call on our lives to go out. And for many of us, that just looks like going to work. But we're called to do things with our everyday life, right? In the book of Acts, it does say the church sold their things, pooled their resources. They shared, they welcomed people in an incredible way. We spent 7 years in Lethbridge. Rachel and I had our kids there. And after that season, we felt the nudge of God to go to Vancouver, where I was going to do my master's. So quit my job, accepted the thing into the program, and then thought, right, I have to figure out how to live in one of the most expensive cities in the world with no job. Okay, this could get tricky, but God will trust you in this. And I was talking to my mom one day, and she said, oh, I used to work with someone who moved to Calgary, whose sister, I think, lives in the area. And I was like, Mom, that's the definition of a stranger. That's not a great solution here. But ended up connected via an email and got to know this couple who happened to live on this country estate, 5 acres, but beautifully located by the highway, by the ocean, by the forests. Happened to have a recently renovated, fully furnished guest house on their estate that they had been praying about a way to use to bless someone. And we sent them an email, and they're like, this is perfect. We're not going to charge you much rent. And so not only did God provide a place for us to live, which is important, but he provided an extravagant, abundant place for us to live. And this is the way that God works. What's so interesting to me about this story and so many other stories we hear about God doing really good things, God blessing people, God working miracles, is there's often a need or something that's miraculously met. But it doesn't appear out of nowhere, right? Yes, Jesus turned water into wine. That happens. That's really cool. Usually, someone brings the wine, right? Usually, someone in our community, someone we don't know, someone is prompted by God to have exactly what we need in a way that we could never have coordinated. But God shows up in the midst of that sacrifice. He shows up for us. He's weaving our stories together in such beautiful ways. And I think we're called to be this winsome community. You know, in the early Roman Empire, when the church was starting, it wasn't very big. And the church historians have looked at what happened. What was the flipping point where Christianity became this dominant religion? And it was the plague. Real cheery. What happened is the plague came and started killing people, and all the nobles, all the Romans ran out of town. And what was left was the Christians, who could have stayed safe. They could have run out of town. They chose to care for the sick and the poor. And many of them died. Many of them, as we understand now, got immunity. And so when Rome started to rebuild, every person had a personal connection with someone who was living a life that looked so wildly different than the values of the culture. And the church exploded because of the way that people chose to live sacrificially. I think sacrificial living is so important in our churches too, right? We serve each other. We use our gifts and our skills. We step into things there. We give financially. This is really important. And Jesus reminds us that it's not the amount we give, it's giving sacrificially. And that is a convicting thing for each of us. Are you feeling what you are giving to the church? Does it stop you from doing other things? Jesus commended the woman who came and gave her last 2 coins. I also think we at the church, we give our preferences. And this one's fun. I'm a worship pastor. I hear a lot about people's preferences, right? It's too loud, it's too quiet, the lights are too bright, the lights are too dim. We should be singing this song, we should be singing this song, right? Everything. And it's great. People are often well-natured. But my favorite example of this was a guy in my church in Lethbridge, older gentleman, sat kind of 4 rows in on the right-hand side, came in every Sunday, sat down, pulled out the big orange ear protection, like the over the ear. You couldn't miss it from across the room. And he did that not to make a statement to those around him. He did it because it was so important for him to be in the same room as his grandchildren and to be worshiping together. And the fact that it was too loud for his ears, he could find a solution to that. He gladly gave his preferences. He didn't go down the street to another church with music he liked. And I think this is what we're called to as a church. As we mature as believers in things of preference, we make way. We give it up for those who don't yet know Jesus, for those who are coming up. I think we're called as well to live sacrifice when we see the problems of the world. And we're all experiencing this now. If you watch the news, it's overwhelming. There's so much going on. But I think we're called to step in as followers of Jesus, to use the little that he has given us and to offer it back to him. And for me, and part of my journey, a significant part of that has been compassion. It's been the work of compassion. I've had the privilege of being on the field and meeting sponsor kids who are a part of our lives. And their picture hangs on the wall in the hallway between our two kids' bedrooms. We pray for them all the time. I've got to meet them and see this work up close. I've got to write letters. We just had our first kid graduate out of the program, which was so exciting. I love compassion because it's child-focused, church-driven, and Christ-centered. It's centered around the gospel, right? Poverty is not just physical. We have a shared poverty. That's what brings us to church, our need for Jesus. And compassion gets that, and it is a part of everything they do, while still helping to relieve the physical poverty. It is church-driven. The church is like messy, right? It's not always easy. Sometimes it's really like cringy and hard and full of drama that doesn't feel right, and it's the hope of the world and the bride of Christ. And so we are called to be a part of the church and to partner with the church, God's kingdom coming on earth. It's child-focused, right? There are lots of problems, lots of challenges with the world, but children have the greatest hope of turning that around. And they're often the most at risk. So they work there. It's deeply relational. Compassion, if you want to come ask questions, please do at the table. But everything they do relies on the people who are on the ground, who know these kids, who know their families. When I was in Colombia, I met one of our compassion kids, and the thing that struck me most, he's the same age as my son, was how much his mom and I had in common for our hopes and dreams. Lived in wildly different settings, wildly different cultures, didn't speak the same language. And yet we bonded over this desire to see our kids flourish and to know Jesus. Later on this trip, I got to go to the Compassion Center where they were not only working with young kids, but also working with young adults who were about to graduate out of the program and providing them with career training. I had my hair cut. It's one of the best haircuts I've ever had. By one of the kids in the program who had grown up, and instead of the life of hopelessness that his peers had, he had a deep, resounding hope and a future. And he could provide for himself. I remember hearing a story when I was in the Dominican Republic of a pastor in a really rough community whose car was broken into one day and all the contents were gone through and taken. And the next day he came into the office and there was a young man in front of him holding all of his stuff. And he said, "I'm so sorry. I'm one of the young guys in the local gang, and we run everything, but when I brought this stuff back to the gang leader," he said, "Did you take this from the pastor of that church? You need to take this back right now. We do not mess with that church. They do far too much good in our community. Leave them alone. They love my kids so well." Isn't that what the legacy of the church should be? Isn't that what we're being invited into as we're being invited to sacrifice? I want to show you this short video, which will just give you a glimpse of what the Compassion Kids experience.
How magical that moment was. When I knew that I have a sponsor now, it changed everything, literally. My name is Eric. I'm born in a family of 8 children, 4 boys, 4 girls. My father died when I was 8 years. And the time my father died, it changed the whole story. The relatives from his ancestral home came and took away all the wealth. At the time, we were barely left with nothing. Life was never the same at that point. It meant not having access to better health, not having access to good education. We so much wanted to be at school, but we never had an opportunity. That was all gone. An uncle who worked with Compassion as a volunteer, he got in contact with my elder sister. They worked alongside with my mom to have us registered in a Compassion program. There was this big ray of hope, Compassion coming in. When I knew that I have a sponsor now, this was another highlight to me. Like getting a sponsor, it changed everything, literally. I'm worth. I have a life. I'm loved. I'd just finished university. She came and surprised me. Is there anyone who would desire to come and take care of you? Is there anyone who would be thinking about you? From the other end of the world, you receive news that someone is coming in.
Actually, Eric, we have a message from Dorothy, and we'd love to share it today.
Hi, Eric. It is so good to be able to send you a message today. I had no idea the impact my sponsorship would have, and it's just been amazing to see how far you've come since I first started sponsoring you when you were 8. I am so proud of you, and I'm definitely going to friend for life. Keep in touch.
Every time I think of Dorothy, I just see a person who changed the world, who saw a desert and believed that there is water. It can turn into a big tree. It can turn into a forest. Sponsoring a child with Compassion is giving an opportunity to live. It's more than just picking a name. It's more than just sending the little money, writing letters. It's more of giving a life and making that life worth living and very meaningful.
Living a life of sacrifice has all kinds of implications. And I think there's a reason that you're here today, and there's a reason that Gateway partners with the Ministry of Compassion. And I want to encourage you to do what Dorothy did and live a life of sacrifice in this little way. And for $47 a month, you can sponsor a kid. They're back on the table. This is Pablo. You can read a little bit on the inside. You can fill out the form and leave it with Dean or one of the volunteers who would love to answer any of your questions. It's just a small opportunity to release the control of the things that we have and to live back to God. I encourage you to take that step today, whether it's your first Compassion child or whether it's your 5th.